there you are, curled up in your third warm blanket, hand trembling as you nudge the thermostat up another degree, silently cursing the upcoming electricity bill. Right? Sounds familiar. We've all complained about it being too cold when the temperature outside barely dips into the teens. How adorable. But have you ever, even for a fleeting moment, stopped to wonder what would happen if that magical heater wasn't there? No fancy down jacket. Not even a decent roof over your head. Therefore, if you think adding an extra layer of clothing is the end of the world, then, my friend, you're about to step into a whole different realm. A world where cold isn't just an uncomfortable sensation, but a brutal, relentless enemy lurking to devour every last bit of life. Today, we're going to strip away the pretense, explore why facing a truly harsh winter without adequate heating is one of the most miserable, awful, and well, frankly, sucked experiences a human can endure. Brace yourselves, because it's about to get very cold in here. So, you've felt the first chill of the season, haven't you? Don't leave just yet, because what you've just heard is only the tip of this very frigid iceberg. Because up ahead, we're going to dig deep into the real nightmares. From your skin cracking like a drought-stricken field, your fingers freezing numb, to the sheer joy of using an outhouse in sub-zero temperatures. Trust me, it'll be an unforgettable experience. But it's not all misery. We'll also explore the desperate and sometimes utterly ridiculous warming efforts humans make when faced with Mother Nature's fury. Are you curious to find out how people survived or didn't those endless nights when even the mind itself felt like it was freezing over? Therefore, if you're finding this interesting, don't hesitate to hit that like button right now. And more importantly, please subscribe and ring that notification bell so you don't miss any heartwarming moments on this bone-chilling journey. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll appreciate your heater more than ever. Oh, by the way, what's the most memorable winter you've ever experienced? Share your story in the comments below. Let's warm each other up. Part 1T, the physical nightmare when your body betrays you. Alright, settle in, get comfortable. Maybe grab that extra, fluffy blanket, the one you only use when the thermostat dips just so. Feeling cozy? Good, because we're about to embark on a journey, not to a tropical paradise. Oh, no, but to a place where cozy is a forgotten word, a mythical creature, like a unicorn that actually pays its taxes. We're talking about enduring a truly brutal winter without the modern miracle of central heating, or even, let's be honest, enough of anything to keep the Grim Reaper from eyeing you up like a discounted turkey on Boxing Day. This isn't just about feeling a bit chilly. This is about your own body, that vessel you generally trust to, function, staging a full-blown rebellion. It's about the constant, grinding, physical misery that becomes your unwelcome roommate, your shadow, your everything. So, let's peel back the layers metaphorically, of course, because in this scenario, you'd be clinging to every scrap of fabric like it was made of gold pressed latinum. First up, the star of our show, the cold itself. Not your, ooh, I should have worn a scarf kind of cold. No. We're talking about a cold that has PhDs in misery and advanced degrees in seeping into your very soul. But this is a cold that doesn't politely knock. It kicks down the door, trashes the place, and refuses to leave. It's an invasive entity, a relentless pressure that starts at your extremities and wages a slow, merciless war inwards. Imagine your fingers and toes staging the first protest. They go from feeling a bit tingly, like you've sat on them funny, to completely numb, like useless, fleshy icicles dangling from your limbs. Therefore, simple tasks? Forget it. Buttoning a coat, if you're lucky enough to have one with buttons, becomes an Olympic sport you're doomed to fail. Holding a cup, you'd have better luck training a squirrel to do your taxes. And the shivering. Oh, the glorious, uncontrollable shivering. You think it's your body's clever way of generating heat. But after hours or days, it's just another form of torture. Your muscles ache, your jaw clatters like a malfunctioning jackhammer, and you expend precious energy you desperately need, all for a pathetic, fleeting flicker of warmth that vanishes faster than your New Year's resolutions. It's not a gentle tremor. It's a full body convulsion, a violent, rhythmic reminder from your anatomy that it's deeply, deeply unhappy with the current management. Then there's the cold that settles in your bones. This isn't a surface level chill. This is the kind of cold that you feel in your joints, in your marrow. It makes every movement a creaking, groaning protest. Standing up feels like your skeleton is made of rusty hinges. Walking, a slow, agonizing shuffle. You start to move like a 90-year-old, even if you're in your prime. Therefore, any activity that requires even a modicum of agility is off the table, which, spoiler alert, includes most things required for survival. And sleep. That sweet escape. Ha! Good one. Sleep becomes a battlefield. You huddle, you curl, you pile on whatever pathetic scraps of covering you possess. But the cold is a master infiltrator. It slithers through every gap, every thin patch, and settles next to you like an unwelcome specter. You might drift off, exhausted, into a shallow, shivering doze. Therefore, you wake up not refreshed, but more depleted, colder, and with the delightful addition of new aches and pains you didn't even know were possible. Your bed, if you can call it that, transforms from a place of rest into a nightly torture rack designed by a particularly sadistic ice demon. The sheer, mind-numbing monotony of being constantly, inescapably cold is a physical drain that words can barely capture. It's not an event, it's a state of being. A miserable, frozen, aching state of being. Now, let's talk about your largest organ, your personal environmental shield, your skin. In our modern, lotion-infused world, we fret over a dry patch on our elbow. But in this icy hellscape, your skin is about to go on a journey of degradation that would make a dermatologist weep. The first casualty is moisture. The cold, dry air sick us because freezing air holds sod. All humidity acts like a vampire, sucking every last drop of moisture from your epidermis. Your skin, once perhaps supple, starts to feel tight, stretched like a drumskin pulled too taut. Therefore, itchiness, an all-consuming, maddening itchiness that no amount of scratching us, which you shouldn't do, but try telling that to your desperate lizard brain, can truly satisfy. Then comes the flaking. You shed skin like a particularly unfortunate reptile. Your clothes, if you dare to remove them, will be dusted with a fine powder of you. Charming. But it gets worse. The tightness and dryness progress to cracking. We're not talking about a delicate little line. We're talking fissures. Painful, angry red cracks especially around your knuckles, your lips, your heels, any area that moves or bears weight. Therefore, every time you clench your fist, every time you smile, a rare event, admittedly, every step you take, these cracks will protest with a fresh jolt of stinging, burning pain. It's like being slowly, methodically attacked by 1,000 tiny paper cuts. Only these ones don't heal. They just get deeper and angrier. Your lips. Oh, they're a special kind of tragedy. They'll go from chapped to cracked to bleeding in record time. Forget whistling a happy tune. You'll be lucky if you can open your mouth wide enough to eat without wincing. And if you, in a moment of absent-minded desperation, lick them. But that momentary relief is a cruel trick. The saliva evaporates, leaving them even drier and more prone to splitting. Therefore, you learn to live with a perpetually sore, bleeding mouth, which does wonders for your appetite, let me tell you. And let's not forget chilblains, or as I like to call them, Satan's little skin blisters. These are itchy, swollen, reddish, purple patches that appear on your fingers, toes, ears, and nose after exposure to cold, damp conditions. They throb, they burn, they itch with an intensity that can drive you to the brink of madness. You want to scratch them raw. You want to dunk them in boiling water. Don't do that. Therefore, these delightful little souvenirs of your suffering serve as a constant, throbbing reminder of just how much your body hates its current predicament. Your skin, your first line of defense, becomes a roadmap of misery, a cracked, bleeding, itching testament to why this whole no heating in winter thing comprehensively sucks. It's not just uncomfortable, it's a constant source of pain and a glaring invitation for infections, which, in this scenario, you are spectacularly ill-equipped to deal with. We've touched on them, but your digits, those marvelous little extremities that allow you to manipulate the world, deserve their own special circle of hell in this narrative. Because when the cold truly sets in, your fingers and toes are the first to wave the white flag, betraying you in the most inconvenient and painful ways imaginable. It starts with that familiar numbness, a sort of dull, cottony feeling. You can still move them, mostly. But then the numbness deepens, spreads. They start to feel less like part of you and more like foreign objects unenthusiastically tacked onto your hands and feet. Dexterity. That's a luxury item you can no longer afford. Trying to tie a knot, thread a needle, see if you're optimistic enough to be sewing, or even just pick up something small becomes a farcical display of fumbling incompetence. Therefore, tasks that were once trivial become monumental struggles, each one a fresh wave of frustration. Imagine trying to assemble IKEA furniture, wearing oven mitts made of ice. That's the vibe. Then comes the pain. Oh, the exquisite, mind-bending pain when, or if, circulation attempts a comeback. If you manage to find a fleeting source of warmth and blood tentatively starts to creep back into those frozen appendages, it's not a gentle reawakening. It's an agonizing pins and needles sensation cranked up to 11, a burning, stabbing, throbbing agony that can make you yelp. But this pain is a double-edged sword. It means they're still, technically, alive. The alternative is far grimmer, because let's not tiptoe around it. Frostbite. That's the boogeyman lurking in every icy gust of wind. When your tissues actually freeze. First, the skin might look waxy, white, or grayish yellow. It feels hard, cold, and utterly devoid of sensation. You might not even realize how bad it is at first because, well, you can't feel anything. But this is your body literally starting to die piece by piece. If it's superficial, you might get away with some nasty blisters and long-term sensitivity. If it's deep, we're talking tissue death, blackened, mummified flesh. Therefore, amputation, whether by a desperate, unsterile blade in a primitive setting, or by your own body eventually shedding the dead part, becomes a horrifyingly real possibility. So, yeah, those cute little mittens you scoffed at. Suddenly, they seem like a pretty good idea when the alternative is counting your remaining toes on one hand. The constant, gnawing fear of losing a part of yourself to the cold adds a delightful psychological layer to the already heaping physical torment. Your own fingers and toes become ticking time bombs of potential agony and loss. You'd think breathing, the most basic, unconscious act of survival, would be exempt from this frosty fiesta of suffering. You would be adorably, tragically wrong. Inhaling deeply cold air is like swallowing a shard of ice. It hits the back of your throat and your lungs with a raw, burning sensation. Your airways, not fans of this frigid intrusion, constrict. But you have to breathe. So, each breath becomes a conscious, often painful, effort. You might find yourself taking shallow, rapid breaths, trying to minimize the icy assault. Therefore, you're not getting enough oxygen, which contributes to your overall fatigue, mental fog, and general feeling of awfulness. It's a vicious cycle. You're cold, so you breathe poorly. You breathe poorly, so you feel even worse. And the coughing. Oh, the coughing? That dry, hacking, persistent cough that the cold air provokes. It starts as an irritation, a tickle. But it soon escalates into racking spasms that shake your already aching body, making your head pound and your chest feel like it's been kicked by a mule. Each cough is like sandpaper on your raw throat. Therefore, you find yourself dreading the simple act of clearing your throat because you know it will trigger another painful energy sapping cascade. This constant irritation makes you a prime candidate for every respiratory ailment under the L's frozen sun. A simple cold, which in warmer climes might be a minor inconvenience, can morph into bronchitis or, heaven forbid, pneumonia with terrifying speed. Your lungs, already under siege from the temperature, have a weakened defense system. But medical help, antibiotics, a warm, steamy room, those are luxuries from another universe. Therefore, what starts as a cold breath can, with alarming ease, become your last. The simple act of drawing air into your body, something you do thousands of times a day, without a second thought, is transformed into a painful, risky, and utterly exhausting ordeal. It's yet another betrayal by your own biology, another way the relentless cold grinds you down, physically and mentally, breath by painful breath. This, my friends, is just the overture to our symphony of suck. We haven't even touched on food, hygiene, or the mental gymnastics of trying to stay sane when your body is screaming in a dozen different dialects of pain. But for now, just ponder this. Every cell in your body is fighting a losing battle against an enemy it can't see, can't touch, but can feel in every agonizing nerve ending. And that, comprehensively, is why the physical aspect of enduring extreme cold without relief, well, it just plain sucks. Hard. Part 2. daily life a frozen clusterfudge of misery. So, your body is a walking, aching, shivering monument to misery. Fantastic. But life, annoyingly, has to go on, doesn't it? You can't just hibernate like a sensible bears. Who, by the way, has a much better winter coat and probably a decent den. No, you have to attempt to navigate the treacherous landscape of daily tasks, each one transformed by the relentless cold from a minor chore into an epic saga of suck. If part 1 was about your body betraying you, part 2 is about the entire world conspiring to make every waking moment a special kind of frozen hell. Let's start with the basics. Sustenance. You need to eat, you need to drink. Simple, right? But in our unheeded nightmare, even these fundamental acts become fraught with peril and disappointment. Imagine you've managed, through some miracle of perseverance or sheer dumb luck, to prepare something hot. A thin, watery soup, perhaps Crete Rios over a sputtering, smoky fire. You cradle the bowl, a fleeting moment of triumph. But the cold, that ever-present, joy-sucking fiend, is watching. It has an almost supernatural ability to leach warmth from anything. That precious, steaming concoction? It's losing heat faster than a politician loses credibility. You have approximately 30 seconds to wolf it down before it transforms into a lukewarm, then cold, then actively unpleasant, congealed mass. Therefore, mealtimes become a frantic race against the thermal clock, a gulping, scalded tongue affair, rather than a moment of respite. Enjoyment is a luxury you can't afford. Speed is paramount. And what if your food is already cold? An apple, perhaps, if you're lucky enough to have one. Biting into an ice cold apple when your teeth are already aching from the ambient temperature is an experience akin to dental torture. It's like your fillings, SCs, if you have any left after all this, are staging a tiny, painful rebellion. But you have to eat, so you endure, wincing with each chilled, crunchy bite. Therefore, even the act of nourishing yourself becomes another source of discomfort, another small, grinding misery to add to the pile. Water, the elixir of life, except when it's a solid block of ice. You might have a barrel, a bucket, a rudimentary container. But overnight, or even during a particularly bitter day, that life-giving liquid has decided to play statues, and not in a fun way. Therefore, a significant portion of your precious, dwindling energy and fuel, says, if you have any, must be dedicated to the tedious, often smoky, task of melting enough ice just to have something to drink or cook with. And if you don't have fuel, well, then you're looking at chipping away at it, hoping body heat or a sliver of weak sunlight might do the trick, which it rarely does with any efficiency. You become intimately familiar with the profound frustration of being thirsty while surrounded by water you can't actually consume. Preserving food. A cruel joke. In some climates, the cold might act as a natural freezer, which sounds good in theory. But if it's damp as well as cold, or if your storage is less than ideal, which it almost certainly is, you're battling mold and rot just as much as you would in warmer weather. Only now you're doing it with numb fingers and a brain addled by hypothermia. And if you're relying on hunting or foraging, good luck. Animals are smarter than you. They're holed up somewhere. Plants are dormant or buried under snow. Therefore, hunger becomes a constant companion, gnawing away at you. further weakening your already compromised body, making the cold feel even colder. It's a delightful downward spiral of suck. Ah, cleanliness. Next to godliness, they say. Well, in this frozen purgatory, godliness feels a very, very long way off, and cleanliness is a distant, almost forgotten memory. The thought of removing any of your precious layers of clothing, even for a moment, in the biting cold is enough to induce a full body shudder that has nothing to do with the temperature. But, theoretically, one should wash. The reality, you're probably going to embrace the, natural lifestyle with an enthusiasm you never knew you possessed. Therefore, you start to develop a certain aroma, a rich tapestry of stale sweat, wood smoke, and, if you're lucky, and general human unwashedness. Your companions, if you have any, are in the same boat, so at least there's a communal aspect to the funk. Small mercies. But what if you absolutely must wash? Perhaps you've spilled something truly vile on yourself, or the itching from days of accumulated grime has become unbearable. The water, if you can even get it in liquid form, will be glacially cold. The shock of it hitting your skin is like being tasered by an icicle. It's a breathtaking, teeth-clattering, gasp-inducing experience. You'll perform the quickest, most perfunctory splash and dash imaginable, emerging colder, wetter, and profoundly regretting your decision. Therefore, bathing becomes a biannual event if you're feeling particularly ambitious. And then there's the call of nature. It waits for no one, not even when the wind is howling like a banshee and the temperature is actively trying to give your extremities frostbite. If you're lucky, you have a designated, slightly sheltered spot. If not, well, you're braving the elements in your most vulnerable state. The wind seems to take a particular delight in finding every exposed inch of skin. The act itself is rushed, fumbling, and deeply unpleasant. Trying to manage clothing with numb, clumsy fingers while simultaneously trying not to freeze vital parts of your anatomy is a masterclass in undignified desperation. Therefore, you develop an iron will when it comes to holding it, pushing your bladder to its absolute limits to avoid another trip into the icy abyss. This, of course, has its own set of uncomfortable and potentially unhealthy consequences. It's just another layer of suck piled high. Life, even in a frozen wasteland, often requires some form of labor. Perhaps you need to chop wood, a truly Sisyphean task when every swing of the axe sends jolts of pain through your frozen hands and the wood itself is as hard as iron. Maybe you need to repair your laughably inadequate shelter or tend to whatever meager livestock hasn't already succumbed to the cold. But your body, as we've established, is not exactly a well-oiled machine at this point. It's more like a rusty, creaking, frost-covered jalopy that's about to break down. Your muscles are stiff and unresponsive. Your joints ache with a deep, persistent throb. Your numb fingers make handling tools a dangerous gamble. Therefore, productivity plummets to near zero. Tasks that would normally take an hour stretch into an entire afternoon of frustrating, painful effort. Every movement is a calculation of energy expenditure versus potential gain. One, and the cold usually wins. The risk of injury is also magnified tenfold. A slip on an unseen patch of ice, a mishandled tool due to clumsy, frozen hands, these can lead to sprains, broken bones, or nasty cuts. And in a world without proper medical care, even a minor injury can become a life-threatening disaster. Infection is a constant, lurking threat. But you have to try, don't you? Because not working often means not eating or not having shelter. Therefore, you push your protesting body, taking risks you wouldn't normally dream of, all while the cold saps your strength and dulls your focus. It's a recipe for disaster served on a platter of ice. The sheer mental effort of forcing yourself to do anything productive when every fiber of your being is screaming for warmth and rest is immense. Motivation evaporates in the frigid air. The desire to simply curl up and give in to the cold can be overwhelming. But surrender isn't an option if you want to see another sunrise, however bleak and icy that sunrise might be. Therefore, each day becomes a battle of wills, a grinding test of endurance where the reward is simply another day of the same frozen misery. It's the definition of a thankless job, with the cold as your overbearing, perpetually dissatisfied boss. We touched on sleep earlier, but its profound suckiness in these conditions deserves a deeper dive. Because sleep, that glorious state of rest and recuperation, becomes an elusive, frustrating, and ultimately unfulfilling pursuit. You prepare for bed, which might be a pile of straw, a few thin blankets on a hard floor, or if you're truly unfortunate, just the frozen ground itself. You wear every piece of clothing you own, possibly even stuffing dry leaves or grass inside your garments for extra S, and probably very itchy insulation. You huddle, you shiver, you try to find a position that minimizes contact with the cold and maximizes whatever pathetic body heat you can generate. But the cold, as always, is a relentless foe. Therefore, falling asleep is an achievement in itself. More often, you'll hover in that miserable twilight state between wakefulness and sleep, your body too cold and uncomfortable to fully succumb. You'll be acutely aware of the drafts, the hardness of the ground, the aching in your limbs, the chattering of your teeth. You might drift off for a few minutes, only to be jolted awake by a particularly violent shiver or a muscle cramp brought on by the cold and tension. These cramps are another delightful feature, sudden, agonizing spasms in your legs or feet that make you cry out in the darkness. But you can't exactly jump up and walk them off, can you? Not easily, anyway. Therefore, your nights are a patchwork of discomfort, broken sleep, and growing exhaustion. And if you do manage to fall into a deeper sleep, you might wake up feeling even worse. If you've sweated even slightly, perhaps from a feverish dream of warmer climes, that moisture will now be clinging to your skin, cold and clammy, chilling you further. Or you might wake up because a numb limb has finally protested with a barrage of painful pins and needles. But mostly, you wake up simply because your body can no longer tolerate the cold, its internal thermostat screaming alarms that your conscious mind can no longer ignore. Therefore, the dawn, when it finally arrives, brings not a sense of refreshment, but a weary resignation to another day of battling the elements, fueled by a night of inadequate, miserable rest. Sleep, instead of being a refuge, becomes just another chapter in the ongoing saga of why this whole situation sucks on a truly epic scale. It's a cruel irony. The very thing your body needs most to cope with the cold, restorative sleep is the very thing the cold makes almost impossible to achieve. Every aspect of daily existence, from the most basic bodily functions to the simplest tasks, is warped and twisted by the pervasive, inescapable cold. It's a constant, grinding pressure that wears you down, physically and mentally, turning life into a relentless struggle for a warmth that never quite arrives. And that, in a nutshell, is why trying to live a normal life in these conditions is anything but. It's a clusterfudge. A frozen, miserable, utterly sucky clusterfudge. Part 3. Desperate warming. Efforts when creativity meets a dead end. So, you're cold. Shockingly, existentially cold. Your body is a traitor, and daily life is a frozen charade. What's a shivering, miserable human to do? Well, you try to get warm, obviously. This is where human ingenuity, or perhaps sheer, unadulterated desperation, kicks in. But as you'll soon discover, in a world bereft of modern heating solutions, these attempts to battle the encroaching ice age are often a masterclass in clothes, but no cigar. Or, more accurately, clothes, but still frostbitten. Ah, fire. Humanity's oldest frenemy, the bringer of light, the cooker of food, and, most importantly in this scenario, the theoretical source of warmth, the sheer, primal joy of coaxing a flame to life from damp tinder and stubborn kindling in the biting cold cannot be overstated. It's a tiny victory against the encroaching darkness, a flicker of hope in a world that's actively trying to freeze your hopes solid. But that joy, my friends, is often as fleeting as the warmth itself. First, there's the fuel problem. Fire, inconveniently, needs stuff to burn. And in the dead of winter, good, dry fuel can be scarcer than a politician's apology. You might spend hours, precious energy units you don't have, foraging for twigs and branches, only to find them damp, frozen, or buried under a foot of snow. You might resort to burning dried animal dung, which, while effective to a degree, does not exactly fill your living space with the delightful aroma of potpourri. Or, in true desperation, you start eyeing up parts of your already inadequate shelter, or that one rickety chair. Therefore, a significant portion of your existence becomes a relentless, often fruitless, quest for combustible material. Then, assuming you've managed to procure some fuel and actually get a fire going, there's the smoke. Oh, the glorious, eye-watering, lung-choking smoke. Unless you're living in a perfectly designed dwelling with a flawless chimney, a good portion of that smoke is going to decide that your living space is a much cozier place to hang out than the great, cold outdoors. So, while one side of you might be tentatively thawing, your eyes are streaming, your throat is raw, and you're inhaling enough particulate matter to give a modern-day environmental health officer a conniption. Therefore, you're constantly playing a game of, how close can I get to the warmth without asphyxiating? It's a delicate, often losing, balance. And the warmth itself, it's a tease. A cruel, localized, one-sided affair. The side of you facing the fire might be slowly roasting, your skin tight and uncomfortable, while your back remains an icicle. So you engage in the winter rotisserie, a constant, slow turning to try and achieve an even distribution of warmth, a shuffling, shivering dance around the meager flames. But it's never enough. The heat radiates outwards, yes, but the cold seeps in from every other direction. A relentless siege that your tiny, flickering fire can only partially repel. Therefore, true, pervasive warmth remains an elusive dream. You're not so much warm as less cold in one specific, smoky spot. And let's not forget the constant vigilance. Fire, while a friend, is also a pyromaniac toddler. Leave it unattended for too long, or get a bit too enthusiastic with the fuel, and it can quickly turn on you. A stray spark, a sudden gust of wind down your makeshift chimney, and your entire flammable existence could go up in smoke, literally. So, even when you're huddled near it, half asleep from exhaustion and cold, a part of your brain has to remain on high alert. Therefore, the very thing you rely on for survival is also a constant, low-level source of anxiety. It's a demanding, smoky, and often underwhelming ally in your battle against the cold. Okay? Fire is a bit of a diva. What about clothing? Surely piling on the layers is the answer. This is where you discover the profound difference between lots of clothes and effective thermal wear. You'll be wearing everything you own, and probably some things you've scavenged. We're talking multiple layers of thin, worn-out shirts, patched up trousers, maybe a tattered blanket repurposed as a shawl. You look less like a person and more like a mobile laundry pile. But quantity does not equal quality. These ancient, threadbare garments, likely made of cotton or some other equally unsuitable for winter material, offer all the insulating power of a wet paper towel. The wind, that invisible tormentor, will slice right through them as if they weren't even there. Therefore, despite being bundled up like a mummy, you're still, somehow, freezing. And the sheer bulk, moving around in 7 layers of mismatched, ill-fitting clothing, is an exercise in awkwardness. You waddle more than walk. Simple tasks become complex feats of contortion, trying to scratch an itch buried under 5 layers. Good luck. It's like trying to perform brain surgery with oven mitts on. But the alternative, removing layers, is even less appealing. Therefore, you resign yourself to a state of perpetual, bulky discomfort, a walking, shivering testament to the inadequacy of your wardrobe. Then, there's the dampness factor. If you exert yourself even slightly, you're going to sweat. And that sweat, trapped within your myriad layers, has nowhere to go. So it stays there, clinging to your skin, and then, as you cool down, it transforms your clothing into a cold, clammy compress. You go from being merely cold to being cold and wet, which is a whole new level of suck. It's like your own body is actively trying to sabotage your attempts to stay warm. Therefore, the very act of trying to generate heat through activity can backfire spectacularly, leaving you in a worse state than when you started. And let's not forget the critters. Those layers of old, unwashed fabric can become a cozy haven for less desirable company. Lice, fleas, other tiny, itchy things. They don't mind the cold as much as you do, apparently. So, in addition to battling the elements, you might also find yourself engaged in a covert war against microscopic squatters who are making your already miserable existence even itchier. Therefore, your clothing, your supposed shield against the cold, can become another source of irritation, discomfort, and general, all-around suckiness. It's less a warm embrace and more a slightly smelly, potentially infested, and ultimately disappointing prison of fabric. Surely, being indoors must be better than being outdoors, right? Well, better is a relative term when your indoors is a drafty, ramshackle hut, a crumbling stone ruin, or a hastily dug pit in the ground covered with some branches. The wind, your constant, unwelcome companion is a master infiltrator. It will find every crack, every crevice, every poorly patched hole in your dwelling and whistle through with malevolent glee. You can stuff those holes with rags, mud, dried leaves, anything you can find. But the wind is persistent. It's like trying to plug a sieve with your fingers. Therefore, even inside, you're often subjected to a constant, chilling breeze that negates much of the shelter's supposed benefit. It's less a fortress against the cold and more of a slightly less windy version of outside. And the roof. If it leaks when it rains, it's probably going to leak when it snows or when the snow on top starts to melt. So you might have the delightful experience of icy water dripping onto your head or into your meager bedding, or, worst of all, onto your precious, sputtering fire. Nothing says cozy like a damp, smoky hovel with an indoor waterfall feature. Therefore, your shelter, instead of keeping you dry, might actively contribute to your damp, cold misery. Insulation? What's that? The walls are thin, the floor is often just the cold, hard earth, and any heat you manage to generate inside is desperately trying to escape to the much more invitingly cold outdoors. You might huddle together with other shivering souls, if there are any, for communal body heat, but we'll get to that particular brand of joy in a moment. The point is, your shelter is often doing the bare minimum to keep the absolute worst of the elements at bay, and sometimes not even that. Therefore, the difference between inside and outside temperatures can be depressingly small. It's like being in a slightly less breezy refrigerator. You might try to improve things, of course. Banking snow against the outside walls can help a bit if you have the energy to do it. You might try to build an inner sanctum, a smaller, more easily heated space within your larger, draftier space. But these are often desperate stop-gap measures. They might offer a tiny sliver of improvement, but they're not going to magically transform your hovel into a heated penthouse. Therefore, your becomes less a place of comfort and refuge, and more a constant reminder of your precarious, exposed existence. It's a shelter in name only, a drafty, damp, and deeply disappointing barrier against a world that's determined to freeze you. When all else fails, there's the huddle, the ancient, primal technique of cramming as many warmths, or, more accurately, less cold bodies into a small space as possible, in the hope that collective misery will somehow generate a spark of actual warmth. And to some extent, it works. A little. Sharing body heat is undeniably better than having no heat at all. But let's not romanticize it. Personal space. That's a concept from a bygone era of luxury. You will become intimately familiar with the smell, the sounds, snoring, coughing, teeth chattering, and the general presence of your fellow huddlers. If someone has a cold S, and someone always has a cold, you're all getting that cold. If someone has lice, congratulations, you're now a louse landlord too. Therefore, while you might be marginally warmer, you're also marinating in a delightful stew of shared germs and general human effluvia. And the politics of the huddle. Who gets the coveted spot in the middle, furthest from the drafts, and closest to the theoretical center of warmth? Who gets relegated to the chilly, exposed perimeter? It can lead to unspoken tensions, or even outright squabbles, when everyone is cold, tired, and irritable. But mostly, it's just an uncomfortable, cramped, and often smelly necessity. Therefore, this communal warmth comes with a hefty side order of communal discomfort. Sometimes, people will even try to incorporate animals into the huddle, if they have any. A dog, a goat, maybe even a particularly placid and desperate pig. This adds another layer of aroma, potential for being trodden on, and the general unpredictability of cohabiting with livestock in close quarters. But hey, a warm body is a warm body, right? Even if it smells faintly of wet dog and desperation. Therefore, your quest for warmth can lead to some truly bizarre and undignified sleeping arrangements. These desperate attempts to generate or conserve heat, from wrestling with a smoky fire to becoming part of a human and possibly animal sardine, can highlight the sheer, grinding difficulty of it all. Each solution comes with its own set of problems, its own fresh layer of suck. There's no easy win, no magic bullet. There's just the constant, exhausting, and often deeply unsatisfying struggle to be slightly less cold than you were 5 minutes ago. And that, in itself, is a profoundly miserable way to exist. Part 4. The mental burden when your mind starts to freeze over. So, your body is a symphony of aches and shivers. Your daily life is a frozen obstacle course. And your attempts to find warmth are, shall we say, less than stellar. You might think, well, at least I have my mind, my sharp intellect, my resilient spirit. And to that, the relentless, soul-crushing cold cackles with a sound like ice cracking on a vast, empty lake. Because the physical torment is only half the battle. The other half is waged in the increasingly foggy, desolate landscape of your own psyche. When the cold gets its icy tendrils into your brain, things get truly, deeply sucky. Winter, in its full, unadulterated fury, has a way of shrinking your world. The days are short, often gray and sunless. The nights are an eternity of frigid darkness. You're likely confined to your inadequate shelter for vast stretches of time, because venturing out into the icy maw of the world is often too dangerous, too exhausting, or simply pointless. And this confinement, this enforced inactivity, breeds a special kind of mental torment boredom. Not just a mild, I wish I had something to do, boredom. No, this is a profound, soul-crushing, mind-numbing monotony that can feel as oppressive as the cold itself. There's nothing to do. The vibrant tapestry of life, with its myriad distractions and engagements, is reduced to a few bleak, repeating threads. Try to get warm, try to find food, try not to freeze to death. Rinse and repeat. Your brain, starved of stimulation, starts to turn inwards, which is not always a fun place to be, especially under these circumstances. You might find yourself staring at a patch of frost on the wall for hours, not out of fascination, but because there is literally nothing else to look at. Therefore, time itself seems to stretch and warp, each minute an hour, each hour a day, each day an eternity of the same cold, the same hunger, the same bleakness. And then there's the isolation. Even if you're huddled with others, the shared misery doesn't always translate into meaningful connection. Everyone is too focused on their own discomfort, too depleted to offer much in the way of stimulating conversation or emotional support. Small talk about how incredibly cold it is gets old, fast, and if you're truly alone, the silence, broken only by the howl of the wind or the chattering of your own teeth, can become deafening. Humans are social creatures, by and large. We thrive on interaction. Therefore, this profound isolation can lead to a deep sense of loneliness, a feeling of being utterly adrift in a frozen, indifferent universe. It's a coldness that seeps into your spirit far deeper than any physical chill. The lack of sunlight also plays a cruel trick on your brain. That glorious vitamin D producing orb in the sky is a rare visitor. This can lead to what modern folks call seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, which is a rather polite term for a debilitating, winter-induced depression. You feel lethargic, unmotivated, and a pervasive sense of gloom settles over you like a heavy, icy shroud. Therefore, your already low reserves of energy and willpower are further depleted, making it even harder to cope with the physical challenges. It's a vicious cycle. The environment makes you depressed, and the depression makes it harder to fight the environment. Fun times. Living on the edge of survival, constantly battling an overwhelming and indifferent force like extreme cold, does wonders for your anxiety levels. And by wonders, I mean it cranks them up to a screeching, unbearable crescendo. There's the constant, gnawing worry about the basics. Will we have enough fuel to last the night? What happens when the last of the major food stores run out? Is that cough I'm developing just a cough, or is it the prelude to something far more sinister? These questions, and 1,000 others like them, become a relentless background hum in your mind, an unceasing chorus of what ifs and oh gods. Therefore, relaxation becomes an impossible dream. Your mind is always racing, always calculating, always anticipating the next disaster. And then there's the despair, the slow, creeping realization that your situation is, frankly, hopeless, or at least overwhelmingly difficult with no clear end in sight. Each day is a struggle, and the reward for surviving that struggle is simply another day of struggle. The cold is relentless. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't take breaks. But you do. You get tired. You get weak. You get worn down. Therefore, a profound sense of futility can start to set in. Why bother? What's the point? These are dangerous thoughts, seductive in their bleak simplicity, and they can be harder to fight off than any physical chill. This constant state of high alert and underlying despair takes a massive toll on your cognitive functions. Your ability to think clearly, to make rational decisions, to solve problems, all of it becomes impaired. You might find yourself making stupid mistakes, forgetting simple things, or reacting irrationally to minor setbacks. Your brain, like the rest of your body, is simply too cold, too tired, and too stressed to function optimally. Therefore, you become less capable of dealing with the very situation that's causing your mental decline. It's another one of winter's cruel little feedback loops of suck. The sheer, overwhelming power of nature, when it's actively trying to kill you, can also induce a profound sense of insignificance and helplessness. You are a tiny, fragile creature pitted against an elemental force of unimaginable power. It's humbling in the most terrifying way possible. This can lead to a kind of learned helplessness, a feeling that nothing you do really matters, because the cold will always win in the end. Therefore, your will to fight, your innate drive to survive, can begin to flicker and fade like a dying ember. When you're constantly cold, hungry, sleep deprived, and anxious, your fuse gets very, very short. patience becomes a forgotten virtue. Irritability becomes your default setting. The smallest annoyance, someone coughing too loudly, someone taking up too much space in the huddle, someone breathing your precious, slightly less cold air can trigger a disproportionate surge of anger. You snap at your companions. They snap back. Resentments fester. Old grievances, long buried, resurface with renewed bitterness. The shared misery, instead of binding you together, can start to tear you apart. The thin veneer of civilization, already stretched taut by hardship, begins to crack. Therefore, the already challenging task of communal survival becomes even more fraught with tension and potential conflict. Your fellow sufferers can transform from allies into additional sources of stress. This isn't because people are inherently bad. It's because prolonged, extreme hardship erodes our better natures. The constant struggle for basic survival can bring out the worst in us, stripping away empathy and compassion, leaving behind a raw, desperate focus on self-preservation. You might find yourself eyeing your neighbor's slightly larger piece of dried meat with a covetousness that would horrify your former, well-fed self. Therefore, trust can break down. Alliances can crumble. In the worst-case scenarios, it can become every man, woman, and shivering child for themselves. The mental strain of constantly suppressing your own discomfort, while also trying to navigate the equally frayed nerves of those around you, is exhausting. You're walking on eggshells, trying not to provoke an outburst, while simultaneously trying not to have one yourself. It's a pressure cooker environment, and explosions are inevitable. Therefore, the shelter, which should be a place of relative safety, can become a battleground of petty squabbles and simmering resentments, adding another layer of psychological torment to the already overflowing cup of suck. If the anxiety and despair don't get you, the apathy might. After a while, your brain, in a desperate act of self-preservation, might simply start to shut down. The constant barrage of negative stimuli, the cold, the hunger, the pain, the fear becomes too much to process. So, you stop feeling. Or at least, you stop feeling as acutely. A strange sort of numbness, a detached indifference, can set in. This isn't a peaceful resignation. It's a dangerous lethargy. You stop caring as much about your own well-being or the well-being of others. The will to fight, to strive, to make those desperate little efforts to improve your situation begins to wane. Why bother mending that hole in the wall? The wind will just find another one. Why bother foraging for more fuel? You'll just be cold again tomorrow. Therefore, you start to neglect yourself, to give in to the cold in small, incremental ways, each one a tiny step closer to the abyss. In extreme cases, this can lead to a state where individuals become almost unresponsive, sitting or lying listlessly, making no effort to help themselves, even when death is clearly imminent. It's as if the mind simply decides it's had enough and throws in the towel. This isn't a conscious decision, but rather the final, tragic outcome of a psyche battered beyond its limits. Therefore, the cold doesn't just kill your body, it can extinguish your spirit long before your heart stops beating. And sometimes, the mental strain manifests in even stranger ways. Hallucinations, delirium, the starving, freezing brain can start to play tricks on you. You might see oases of warmth, hear voices offering comfort, or believe you're somewhere else entirely, somewhere warm and safe. These are not welcome escapes. They are signs of a mind unraveling, a final, desperate attempt to make sense of an intolerable reality. Therefore, the very organ you rely on for survival can become your most treacherous enemy, leading you further into danger with its false promises and distorted perceptions. The mental burden of enduring extreme, unremitting cold is a silent killer, a creeping erosion of everything that makes you human: your hope, your empathy, your reason, your will to live. It's a testament to the fact that we are not just physical beings. Our minds are intricately connected to our bodies, and when one suffers, the other inevitably follows. And that, perhaps more than any frozen toe or chattering tooth, is why this whole experience sucks on a profoundly, existentially terrifying level. It's not just that you might die, it's that you might lose yourself long before you do. Part 5. The lethal dangers beyond just a nasty cold. So, you're physically wrecked. Your daily life is a shambles. Your attempts to get warm are a tragicomedy, and your mind is teetering on the brink of a frosty abyss. You might think, surely it can't get any worse. Oh, you sweet summer child. You naive, inadequately insulated optimist, because we haven't even truly delved into the ways this whole freezing your bits off scenario can, and often does, turn fatally, unequivocally, and permanently sucky. We're moving beyond mere discomfort and into the realm of actual, no holds barred life or death peril. This is where the cold stops being an inconvenient bully and becomes a ruthless, efficient killer. This is the big one, the headliner, the undisputed heavyweight champion of cold-related fatalities. Hypothermia. It sounds almost clinical, doesn't it? Less threatening than, say, being eaten by a frozen bear. But don't let its polysyllabic dignity fool you. Hypothermia is a slow, sneaky, and utterly merciless way to go. It begins subtly. You're shivering. Yes, but we've established that's just Tuesday in this frozen hellscape. Then, as your core body temperature continues its relentless downward slide, the shivering might actually stop. This is not, I repeat, not a good sign. It doesn't mean you're suddenly, magically warmer. It means your body is so depleted, so exhausted from its frantic attempts to generate heat, that it's starting to give up on even that most basic defense mechanism. Therefore, you might feel a deceptive sense of calm, or even a bizarre, inappropriate warmth, just as things are getting truly critical. Next, your mental state, already as foggy as a London morning in a coal-burning era, deteriorates further. Confusion sets in. Slurred speech. Clumsiness that makes your earlier fumbling look like a masterclass in dexterity. You might become disoriented, unsure of where you are or what you're doing. Your judgment, already questionable, goes completely out the window. This is where you hear stories of people in the advanced stages of hypothermia, paradoxically stripping off their clothes, convinced they're overheating. Therefore, the very person who needs help the most becomes incapable of recognizing their own peril or taking rational steps to save themselves. It's like your brain is actively trying to commit suicide by icicle. As your core temperature plummets further, your bodily functions begin to shut down. Your heart rate slows. Your breathing becomes shallow and erratic. You become lethargic, drowsy, eventually losing consciousness. And then, quietly, without much fuss, your heart simply stops. You just fade away, a frozen statue in a silent, indifferent world. Therefore, hypothermia isn't a dramatic, explosive end. It's a slow, creeping, insidious fade into oblivion, often so gradual that the victim and any equally cold companions might not even realize the true gravity of the situation until it's far, far too late. It's the ultimate suck. Your own body, in its attempt to conserve energy for vital organs, essentially decides that you are no longer vital. And the truly sucky part, it can happen indoors, in your supposedly sheltered hovel, if the conditions are bad enough and your body's defenses are sufficiently worn down. You don't need to be lost in a blizzard. You just need to be consistently losing more heat than you can produce. But because it's so insidious, so quiet, it's a killer that often goes unnoticed until it has already claimed its prize. Therefore, the constant, gnawing cold isn't just uncomfortable. It's a loaded gun pressed against your temple, and hypothermia is the finger slowly squeezing the trigger. Your body, under the constant duress of cold, malnutrition, and stress, is not exactly a fortress of good health. Your immune system, bless its cotton socks, is fighting a losing battle on multiple fronts. It's overworked, underpaid in terms of nutrients and rest, and generally feeling pretty demoralized. And this makes you a walking, talking, evil, or perhaps coughing and wheezing invitation for every opportunistic pathogen in the vicinity. A common cold, which in your previous, warmer life might have been a week of sniffles and self-pity, can now escalate with terrifying speed. That tickle in your throat can become a raging inferno. That cough can deepen, become productive in the most unpleasant way, and settle in your chest like a lead weight. Bronchitis? Almost certainly. Pneumonia? A very real, very deadly possibility. Therefore, illnesses that would normally be trivial become potentially fatal. And let's not forget about infections. Those cracks in your skin we talked about, the ones on your hands from fumbling with frozen wood, or on your feet from ill-fitting, damp footwear. Each one is a gilded gateway for bacteria. In a world without soap, antiseptic, or antibiotics, even a small cut can become a festering, pus-filled nightmare. Sepsis, gangrene, these aren't just words from a history book. They're looming possibilities. Therefore, your body, already struggling to maintain its core temperature, now has to divert precious resources to fighting off an internal invasion. A battle it's ill-equipped to win. Malnutrition, an almost inevitable companion to extreme cold, further cripples your body's defenses. Without adequate vitamins, minerals, and calories, your immune cells are like an army trying to fight with sticks and stones against tanks. They just don't have the resources to mount an effective defense. But the germs, they're having a field day. Therefore, you become a petri dish for disease, a breeding ground for bacteria and viruses that your healthier self would have swatted away with ease. And if you're living in close, unhygienic quarters with other equally compromised individuals, well, then you've got yourself a perfect storm for an epidemic. One person gets sick, and it can sweep through your little band of sufferers like wildfire through a dry forest. Dysentery, influenza, whatever delightful plague, is making the rounds. You're all prime candidates. Therefore, the very act of huddling together for warmth can become a death sentence, as you share not just body heat, but also a delightful cocktail of airborne and contact pathogens. It's a grim lottery where the prize is often a slow, agonizing, and thoroughly sucky demise. When you're cold, clumsy, and your brain isn't firing on all cylinders, your chances of doing something profoundly stupid with fatally sucky consequences increase exponentially. These aren't dramatic, heroic deaths. These are the tragic, almost farcical, ways that life can be extinguished when your environment and your own compromised state conspire against you. Slips and falls, for instance. Ice is slippery. Shocking, I know. But when your balance is already off, your footwear is inadequate, and your reaction times are slowed by the cold, a simple patch of ice can send you sprawling. You might just get a nasty bruise, or you might crack your head open, break a leg, or dislocate a hip. In a world without emergency rooms or orthopedic surgeons, such an injury is often a death sentence. You become immobile, a burden, and an easy target for hypothermia or infection. Therefore, just walking from your hovel to the Dios, probably frozen latrine pit, can become a life or death expedition. Then there are fire-related accidents beyond just burning your shelter down. In your desperate attempt to get warm, you might huddle too close to your major fire. You doze off, exhausted. A piece of your tattered clothing or a stray blanket gets a little too friendly with an ember. Suddenly, you're on fire and trying to put out flames on yourself or a companion with numb, clumsy hands in a confined, smoky space is a recipe for horrific burns. These burns, even if not immediately fatal, will almost certainly become infected, leading to an agonizing and prolonged end. Therefore, the very source of your potential salvation can also be the instrument of your excruciating demise. It's a cruel irony that the cold seems to specialize in. Or consider carbon monoxide poisoning. That smoky fire we talked about. If your shelter is poorly ventilated Sevres, and it almost certainly is, you're not just inhaling irritating smoke, you're potentially inhaling lethal doses of carbon monoxide, the silent killer. It's odorless, colorless, and it will lull you into a final, fatal sleep without you even realizing what's happening. You just get a bit drowsy, maybe a headache, and then nothing. Therefore, your desperate attempt to stay warm indoors can, with a tragic lack of drama, simply suffocate you. Even something as simple as handling tools can become deadly. An axe slipping from frozen, numb fingers can lead to a severed digit or a gaping leg wound. A knife, used for preparing food or cutting kindling, can easily miss its mark. Again, in the absence of proper medical care, these injuries are far more serious than they would be in a modern context. Therefore, the very acts necessary for survival, preparing food, gathering fuel, are fraught with an elevated level of mundane, yet potentially lethal, peril. These aren't the dangers you read about in epic poems. These are the quiet, undignified, and utterly sucky ways that the cold and the desperate measures you take to combat it can snuff out your life. It's a constant barrage of threats, from the insidious creep of hypothermia to the sudden, stupid finality of an accident. And that relentless, multi-front assault on your very existence is what makes this whole scenario not just uncomfortable, not just miserable, but truly, terrifyingly, and lethally sucky. It's a game rigged against you where the house, Zai of ice, always wins. The conclusion, so, still think your electric blanket is overpriced. So, there you have it. A whirlwind tour through the frozen, God-forsaken landscape of what it truly means to endure a brutal winter without the comforting embrace of adequate heating. We've shivered through the physical betrayals, stumbled through the frozen quagmire of daily life, winced at the desperate and often comically ineffective attempts to find warmth, felt the icy grip of despair on our minds, and stared into the cold, dead eyes of lethal peril. If you're not currently hugging your radiator or mentally composing a love sonnet to your thermostat, well, you might just be a frost giant in disguise. From the relentless, bone, deep chill that turns your own body into an aching, shivering prison, to the way the simplest tasks, eating, sleeping, even just existing, become monumental struggles against an indifferent, icy foe. It's a masterclass in comprehensive suck. We saw how fire, that supposed beacon of hope, can be a smoky, demanding, and ultimately underwhelming ally. How layers of clothing become layers of itchy, damp disappointment. How your shelter is often just a slightly less windy version of the frozen hell outside. And the mind? Oh, the poor, beleaguered mind. We explored the crushing monotony, the gnawing anxiety, the creeping despair that can turn even the most resilient spirit into a hollow, shivering husk. The way the cold doesn't just numb your fingers and toes, but also your hope, your empathy, your very will to live. It's a battle fought not just against the elements, but against the unraveling of your own sanity. Then, just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, we tiptoed through the graveyard of lethal dangers. Hypothermia, the silent assassin. Rampant illness, feasting on your weakened immune system like a ravenous wolf. And the stupid, mundane accidents that can turn a bad day into your very last day. It's a relentless barrage, a constant reminder that, in this scenario, you're not just uncomfortable, you're actively being hunted by the cold itself. But why drag you through this icy inferno of hypothetical suffering? Is it just to revel in the grim and the ghastly? Rhetorical question, addressing potential audience thought. Well, maybe a little. Misery, even fictional, can be strangely compelling. Therefore, the real point, beyond the dark humor and the catalog of woes, is perspective. The next time you find yourself grumbling because you have to scrape a thin layer of frost off your car windshield, or because the office air conditioning is a tad too enthusiastic, or because your fancy coffee isn't quite hot enough, take a moment. Picture yourself trying to gnaw on a frozen turnip with bleeding gums, while your fingers are too numb to even wipe your nose. Imagine the sheer, unadulterated luxury of a hot shower, a warm bed, a meal that stays warm for more than 30 seconds. Therefore, this journey into the heart of cold-induced suckitude isn't just about why it sucked to be them, or to be in that situation. It's a stark, shivering reminder of how incredibly fortunate most of us are, right here, right now, wrapped in our gore, techs, and sipping our lights. So go ahead, turn up that thermostat an extra degree. You've earned it, just by not having to burn your furniture for warmth. And maybe, just maybe, you'll appreciate that little click of the furnace kicking in just a tiny bit more. Because, trust me, compared to the alternative we've just explored, that sound is the sweetest music imaginable. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think my toes just remembered what frostbite felt like. Time for another pair of socks.